Good morning. Today is March the 12th, 2022. This is John Richardson speaking with you from Toronto, Canada, in one of my ongoing series of podcasts for the American Expat Financial News Journal. And yep, as always, there's a lot going on in the world of expats and American finance, but unless you've been living under a rock, the last few weeks have made other parts of the world and the sufferings of other people far more visible. And today, my guest is Mr. Jimmy Miller, who is, and we'll get to that later, an expat financial planner, but also a person who, up until a couple of weeks ago or less, was actually living in Russia. And we will get to that. And I look forward to his perceptions, descriptions, etc., what is going on there. So this is a great opportunity. Welcome, Jimmy. How are you today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're very welcome. Well, just the fact of your, having been living in Russia recently, make this a very, very interesting podcast. But, I'd love to figure out, get you to describe how you actually got there. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read in the back cover of your book, Divorce the IRS, which great title, by the way, and which I highly recommend to everybody. So here we have Jimmy Miller's condensed biography, I suppose. Born in Zambia, married to a German, and having spent most of his life as an expat. James Miller, CRPC, is no stranger to untangling complicated tax issues. He and his family enjoy international traveling, sailing, mountaineering, and spending time with those they consider true friends. The founder of, is it Baobab Wealth, right?
Correct.
Okay, Baobab Wealth, I'm sorry, and Baobab Wealth Abroad. James helps Americans and cross-border families around the world create real wealth for themselves and their families in tax-efficient ways so they can maximize their own dreams in life and beyond. Now, the first thing from reading that I really want to congratulate you on is that you're able to simultaneously untangle complicated tax issues and enjoy life with all these other things you're doing, international travel, sailing. So congratulations on that. And after we finish the podcast, you can explain to me how you manage these two things simultaneously. But where does the name Baobab Wealth come from anyway?
So Baobab is the tree of life from the Lion King. It's one of the strongest and oldest living trees in the world, usually in tropical places, comes from Africa where I was born. So the tree has a special meaning to me. And I often talk to my clients that investing is a lot like planting a tree. If you just plant the seeds and leave it alone and let it do its thing over time, it will grow naturally and provide for you over the years. So that's why I use the tree, the Baobab tree, as an analogy for investing, as the name for my business.
Very good and very interesting. Okay, so how does a guy born in Zambia end up living in the United States and all these other great places in the world?
So I got my sense of adventure from my parents, who are both Americans. And when they got married, they wanted to travel the world back in the early 70s. And my dad was able to get a job in Zambia, Africa, running sewing factories that was making clothing for a UK-based company. And after living in Zambia, where I was born, my parents fell in love got the travel bug, and from there decided to continue traveling the world. And off we went as a family. I'm the oldest of three. From there, we went to the Philippines, and then we spent some time in Haiti, 5 years in Hong Kong. So being born to Americans, obviously I'm an American citizen myself, but we didn't actually come to the States until high school.
That is fascinating, because to me, that would give you just literally not even to learn so much, but right in your DNA, right from day one, is sort of a very international awareness and view of the world. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And my parents were always very culturally aware and took a lot of time to give us opportunities, all the places around the world that we lived, as kind of travel hubs to then travel from that place out to that region of the world as well.
And was this all these countries you lived in? Was your father sort of able to follow his profession from one to the next to the next? Was that it, or was it?
Correct. So he was always traveling around helping companies set up sewing factories and start production overseas. I like to say he kind of helped the global economy get going back in the 70s and 80s.
Well, that's a very, very interesting way of looking at it. And what was your of all these places? I mean, did you grow up without a sense of permanence, or was your sense of permanence your nuclear family?
More the latter. As children are resilient, and if that's the life you know, that's the life you know. I was used to moving. My parents always encouraged me to learn how to make new friends in every place that I went, and children are good at doing that. So growing up, to be honest, I don't think that I knew any difference when I was a child. That was just life for me.
Mhm. And what are some of your most permanent memories of some of these places? So Zambia, you're very young. How old were you when you left Zambia?
So I was just 1 years old when I left Zambia, so I don't have memories
No
of that
memories
except
there.
going back as an adult. The Philippines is the first place I have memories where my brother and sister were born. And then, of course, my memories get more vivid as I get older. I have very good memories of Hong Kong and really enjoyed living in Hong Kong and traveling up into mainland China back in the 80s.
Mhm. What do you remember most specifically about that?
For a long time, I used to say that Hong Kong was my favorite city in the world. It was the first really large, bustling city that I lived in. I would say Moscow, pre the Ukraine development, was is now my favorite city in the world. But
It's now your favorite city.
yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah. But Hong Kong was amazing, and I went to middle school and started high school there. I joined the Boy Scouts there. I got to do some pretty cool stuff. I was part of the first American Boy Scout troop to do the 50-mile hike award in mainland China. So I just had some really cool experiences in
Actually,
Hong
let
Kong.
me pause you on that for a minute. Now, that is interesting to me. So you're telling me that the Boy Scouts of America, as in the troops that you see in the United States, have international organizations?
Absolutely, Boy Scouts of America is international. There, every single place I've ever lived or traveled, there's been a Boy Scout troop. I'm an Eagle Scout, the highest rank you can attain in Boy Scouts. So I spend a lot of my time trying to give back to the Boy Scout organization because it gave me a lot growing up. And so, yes, I was in Scouts in all the places that I lived.
That is really, really interesting. How long did it take you to get Eagle Scout?
So I started officially. So there's different levels of Boy Scouts, but an actual Boy Scout starts when you're age 11. And I managed to get the rank of Eagle Scout when I was 15.
That's really fast moving, isn't it? Really fast moving. 4 years. So you must have been very, very focused. It must have been your personal goal to be an Eagle Scout, because nobody gets through it that quickly without that as a personal goal.
It was probably a combination of that and my dad's focus. My dad pushing me hard to achieve that goal.
And why was that important to him?
Mm, I think it was a good goal, something to strive for at that age in life. You can learn a lot of things. It provided me a lot of things that weren't really available to somebody living in a city. Because with the Boy Scouts, we got to travel outside the city, and my dad's a big outdoors guy, and I am now as an adult. And so it provided the opportunity to go camping and hiking and learn backpacking and things like that. My dad also knew it would set me up well for the future, and probably getting my Eagle Scouts one of the best things I've ever done. I got scholarships to college because of it. When I visit Boy Scout troops now and I'm encouraging the boys to advance to Eagle Scout or as high as they can, one of the funny things I like to tell them is that, Boy Scouts actually helped me get more girlfriends. When you tell the lady that you like her dad that you're an Eagle Scout, it's amazing. He encourages his daughter to go out with you. And
You're going to
yeah,
win
it's been a lot
points
of
with
things
the
for me.
parents for sure on that. Absolutely, absolutely. It's sort of, it's a stealth dating opportunity. I'd never seen it that way before, but come to think of it, you're probably right. That's very interesting. So I mean, when I was a kid, I was a Boy Scout. But I haven't thought about it particularly since. But basically, what Star, Life, Eagle Scout, right? Are they the same sort of levels of progression?
Those are the upper ranks, correct.
The upper ranks. Okay, very interesting. All right. Now, just when you say the Boy Scouts of America have troops or divisions all over the world, for example, there is a Boy Scouts Canada, right? So that's a different thing, right? You're talking specifically about these, these green uniforms that you see in the U.S. You actually see those same uniforms.
Correct. I'm talking about the US based, the
Yeah,
Green
yeah.
Uniform Boy Scouts of America. Almost every American international school, including the one in Moscow, has a US based American Boy Scout troop at it.
It's amazing. You ought to definitely stay involved in that. Maybe you can be a troop leader at some point if you were, but you'd have to stay somewhere long enough.
Correct.
Or
And
maybe
when my
what
son
you could
gets
do,
older, he'll be a Boy Scout for sure.
maybe, yeah, I can see that. Well, maybe you could create sort of, the international division, the online equivalent or something. But anyway, very interesting stuff. Well, so the Boy Scout thing, it seems to me, was another sort of organizing principle, regardless of where you went, I suppose, because you could always be a Boy Scout.
Correct.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so now you're arriving in the United States for the first time at the beginning of high school, right? Or close to the beginning of high school.
Correct. Close to the beginning of high school.
And Michigan?
In Michigan, correct.
Okay. Where in Michigan?
Grand Rapids. I went to East Kentwood High School.
Okay. And was it the same deal that your father's same business?
Yeah, so he got a job with a company based there in Grand Rapids. And from there, he traveled mostly to the Caribbean and Central America to run the sewing factories that made clothing. But he wanted to be US based so that I could go to high school and my brother and sister could go to high school in the States. And as soon as my brother, the youngest, finished high school, my parents went back offshore again.
Very interesting. And how did you experience the event, the seismic event of arriving in the United States generally and Grand Rapids, Michigan specifically? How was that for you?
It was a cultural shock, to be honest.
That's
You
why I
know,
asked.
schooling was the biggest thing. I found high school in the States after attending international schools around the world. I didn't find the school in Grand Rapids, Michigan, very challenging. I think in 10th grade for my science project, I reused and turned in the same science project I did in 6th grade in Hong Kong, which I think I got a C+ on in Hong Kong, got an A+ in 10th grade in high school in the States, for example.
Oh my God, that does not speak well. This is a public high school.
Correct.
It does not speak well for the public high schools of America, does it?
Nope, that's probably another episode, podcast episode right there.
We can definitely do that one. All right. So you're arriving in grade 10, and so you're spending 3 years. So at this stage in your life, though, you're already an Eagle Scout, right? So
Correct.
there's nothing more to achieve on that front. So did you, pick up some new projects? I mean, you seem very goal oriented and focused to me. Did you pick up a new project, or did you use your status as an Eagle Scout to expand your dating?
A little bit of both. So, I blended back into the American culture. I focused on school. My dad pushed me to get good grades, obviously for college purposes. And I really developed my outdoor skills. I really fell in love with hunting, fishing, camping, hiking, all that kind of outdoor stuff that's available in Michigan.
Mhm. So that takes you through 3 years, 10, 11, 12, and you obviously graduated from high school. Where'd you go then?
Because of my love for outdoors, I decided I wanted to go to college, and that's where Alaska comes in. So I packed my little Ford Ranger and headed up to Alaska to do my undergrad at University of Alaska in Anchorage.
Oh my God, I can just visualize that. So you're driving in a Ford Ranger from Michigan to Alaska. And did you, you must have driven through the Yukon, did you? For part of it?
Correct. Yep.
And did you stop in Whitehorse?
I did stop in Whitehorse.
Whitehorse is, I think, one of the greatest places in the world. I love Whitehorse.
Yep. Stopped in Whitehorse and Dead Horse. I stopped in all those places along the way.
Interesting. And how long does that drive take anyway?
I think if I remember correctly, it took me about 80 hours to drive from Grand Rapids up to Anchorage, Alaska.
So that would have been a couple of weeks, I guess.
Correct.
All right, so you arrive in Anchorage, Alaska, ready to start at the University of Alaska. What happens then? What'd you study anyway?
Business management. Business management. So I just picked a degree that I thought was the easiest to get through. My dad had always told me that unless
Now,
I was going to
hold
do
on a
something.
minute. This is coming from an Eagle Scout. Did you just say that you picked the degree you thought the easiest to get through?
I did say that. I've always believed it was getting the paper, not really what the paper was said on it was the important thing. That the degree showed that you could get through a system and accomplish something, learn something along the way. Then unless you were getting into some really specialized field that it didn't matter so much what your degree was in, but that you got the degree.
I hear you. I hear you. I agree. That's a very pragmatic view of life. I like that. Okay, so business management in the university. This is a 4-year program.
Correct.
What what are the courses that make up a business management degree anyway? What do you study?
Well, there's certainly plenty of liberal arts things mixed in. There's certainly some math mixed in, and then there's a whole core curriculum of business and finance and accounting classes mixed in.
Okay, so these things would have been collectively giving you the sort of academic and to some extent skill-based background to move into the financial planning world. Is that a fair statement?
Maybe. I don't find that what I learned in college really set me up well to be a financial advisor, to be honest. I think that my background learning from actually my mom, who was always pushing me to invest from an early age and teaching me about investments, did a lot more for me to get me going in financial services than what I learned in college. Financial services is it's a people job as well. And I think that uh, a degree in something more liberal arts or people orientated, counseling, behavioral management, things like that would actually set somebody up better to be a financial planner or advisor than a business or a finance degree.
But for you, it sounds like I'm going to call it financial literacy seems to have been in your DNA right from a very young age. I mean, isn't one of the Boy Scout be thrifty?
It is actually, and
Yeah,
I have the personal financial management merit badge as well.
that somehow that doesn't surprise me, but that's interesting because as I think about my years in the Boy Scouts as well, it does. I never, thank you for this because it's never occurred to me before, but it does seem to me that a lot of the values that are reinforced in Boy Scouts are precisely the kinds of values that I think are important for financial planners and for investing in general, particularly thinking long-term, goal setting, patience, and of course being thrifty. I mean, the easiest way to make a dollar is to not spend a dollar, right?
Correct.
So that's fascinating. All right, so you're spending 4 years in Alaska.
Yep, spending 4 years in Alaska, and that's when I got into the financial services industry. While I
And
was,
what about Alaska? Just before we get into that, so did that meet your expectations of the outdoors and all the reasons that you wanted to go there?
it did, and I was very adventurous and climbed a lot of mountains. I actually took a semester off and worked on the deadliest catch boats out of Dutch Harbor uh, back in those days. One of the craziest, most wildest things I've ever done. I would never do it again, but it was a good experience.
Interesting. All right, so you're finished. You've got your degree, and I hope you didn't get any grades that were higher that were necessary to graduate.
I was
Uh,
a mediocre student in college. I got
Excellent.
yeah, B minus type of yeah. I got through it.
A friend of mine was studying for some real estate exams once, and he was frustrated with it, and he needed a 75 to pass. And I looked at him and I said, he's studying away. I said, like, why would you want anything more than a 75? I mean, all this is a pass, that's all it is, right? So, he's nervous about this. And then he called me up after the exam. I passed. What did you get? 75. And I said, congratulations. By God, that is my definition of perfection. You didn't give him even one additional answer.
Yep.
All right, I like that. Okay. So now we're moving into, I guess, the career. You're finished college. All right. And it's time to consolidate these really what sounds like this lifetime of learned values. And where do you go from there? So how did you transition into financial planning?
So I found a company called Waddell and Reed, which doesn't exist anymore, but they were a mutual fund company based out of Kansas City with offices nationwide. And they had a good training program for young financial advisors to get into the business. So my first real job out of school was with Waddell and Reed. And I went through their training program, learned how to sell life insurance, mutual funds, financial planning, things like that.
All right. And now, what year was this?
This would have been 1999.
Okay, so mutual funds were well entrenched, at this point. Okay, all right. All right. So now, did that mean that you moved back to the US to do this, I presume, or?
So this is in Alaska. Right out of college, I started and quickly became a district manager for them. And they actually moved me to run the office in Cherry Creek, right outside Denver, Colorado. After a couple years working in Alaska with them, so I moved to Denver and worked there for a couple years, and eventually outgrew Waddell and Reed, wanted to become an independent financial advisor. And so I started with, I left Waddell and Reed and started my own firm with ING Financial Partners back in the day before they were bought out by Voya.
Mhm.
And
Okay. All right. And how long did you do that? And maybe you can, take us through how then did you end up in Russia?
so there's a big jump there between that. So just to give you a quick, to fill in that big gap there, in 2007, so I've been a financial planner for 7 or 8 years now. When ING got bought out by Voya, I had an opportunity to sell my practice. So I actually sold my practice to another financial advisor that I'd brought on board about 5 years earlier, and decided to take a break from the industry. I really felt a little bit stuck in America after growing up overseas at this point in my life, and I wanted to go back overseas. So I sold my practice and I moved to Australia actually for 5 years. And while I was there, I did a master's in nursing and became a registered nurse. Now, I know this is quite a twist to the story. Most people
That
don't see
is, and
it
I
coming.
really got to get you to pause there and explain your thinking. I mean, I think that's great. But that is a rather major shift, it seems to me.
It is. And so you can sense the goal oriented personality that I have. I literally sat down one day when I was deciding to sell my financial practice, and I literally made a checklist. I said, look, I want to do something where I can travel internationally like I did, like I grew up. I was kind of going back to my roots. I want to do something where I can move country to country, where I can change jobs often like my dad did, and it won't hurt my resume, where I can get paid well, things like that. And I took this list to some of my mentors and I said, this is a list of the things that I want to accomplish with my next move in life. And almost everybody unanimously looked at the list and said, well, you need to become a doctor or a nurse or some kind of medical professional can do all those things. And I like to help people. And so after some investigation, I decided that medical school is a little bit much at that point in my life, but I could become a nurse quite easily. And another mentor of mine said, well, since the goal is to travel internationally, there's a lot of great nursing schools overseas. And so with some Google searching, I found one of the best nursing schools in the world is in Melbourne, Australia. And so I decided I would apply for that. I'd always wanted to get a master's degree, and that if they accepted me, there was a sign and I would do it. So I applied, and being a male and being an international student, I got accepted. And so I moved to Australia and did a master's degree in nursing, and then stayed for an additional 3 years in Australia working as an emergency nurse.
That is fascinating. Now, I heard you in your description leading up to that talk about a mentor and another mentor that you've had. So I gather that you value mentors. You believe in mentorship.
Absolutely. I strongly believe that you become the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with most. And it's better to be a small fish in a big pond than a big fish in a small pond. And one of the best ways I've found to grow in life is to surround myself with people who I want to become, who are more successful than me, who have different thinking than I do. And so mentorship has always been an important part of my life.
I agree with you completely on that. It's rare to hear people articulate that principle, though, because most people's view of life, I think, is, well, if they were successful, it was because of them only, and if they failed, it was because of somebody else, sort of thing. But it's really refreshing to hear somebody say, wow, I sought these people out to help, and and it works, sort of thing. So that's great. Um, okay, so now we're in Australia. My God, you have been all over the world. And what happens then? So now we have 3 years of being an emergency nurse, and
Yep. So I spent a lot of time traveling in that part of the world, doing mountain climbing in New Zealand and things like that. And um, in 2013, I decided that I'd like to go back to the States. I kept my financial licenses in a very small group of friends and family, so I was still actively involved in being a financial advisor, and started learning that there's a lot of expats around the world, and they have very special needs in financial planning. This is where kind of the idea of specializing in US expats was born. And being an
was
expat
there a
myself,
specific event that triggered that? I mean, you're right, of course, but usually there's something that triggers that, some event.
I think it was doing it myself. So, being a child growing up as an expat is one thing, but then now being an adult and being an expat and learning all the rules, filing FBAR and all the things that your listeners would recognize, I realized it was quite a complicated thing and a lot of people needed help with it. And with my personality, I started asking my American friends, who's helping you with this? How are you figuring this stuff out? Because I needed to figure it out. And I realized there wasn't a lot of people out there helping Americans with these issues. And as you know, and your listeners know, Googling this stuff is also quite complicated and hard to figure out on your own.
Well, and also very hazardous, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I agree with you. There aren't a lot of people who do this, and of those who do it, there's still a question of who does it well. But very, very interesting. Okay, so I mean, this is fascinating, right? So we have the values of the Eagle Scout, the perspective of having grown up, all around the world, the experience in financial planning, the years and sort of in the whole nursing thing, which is, I mean, you couldn't possibly be involved in that unless you had, some sense of duty, obligation, and desire to make other people's lives better. I mean, this just sounds like an amazing, combination of human attributes, right, and skills to move you in this direction. All right, but anyway, so we're now 2013. I think that's what you said, right?
Correct.
Okay. So you left Australia? Obviously, you left Australia.
So I left Australia. I decided I would come back to the States. Once I came back to the States, I also timed it. The non-compete for the sale of my original financial practice was up. Many of my clients had contacted, I'd stayed in touch with them. Of course, a lot of clients become friends as well. Many had even come visit me in Australia. I decided I would start a new financial firm now that my non-compete was up, and that's where Baobab Wealth and Baobab Wealth Abroad was born. So I started a new financial practice, my own independent fiduciary financial practice, and started taking on new clients and taking back some of my old clients at the end of 2013, beginning of 2014.
Okay, so now you are an independent financial advisor. Would that be the best word to describe?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Okay. And where are you in the United States at this point? I mean,
So I've gone back to Alaska.
Oh, you're back in Alaska. Okay. All right. Next.
So now I'm kind of at the age, well, I must have been 36 at this point. I really started to have the urge to start a family, maybe meet the right woman, not make life all about me. So just like I did for nursing school, I decided to make a list of all the qualities that I was looking for in a woman. I made quite a list. Decided probably somebody who was international, not American based, somebody who traveled extensively, somebody who liked adventure. And I decided I would start looking for this person. And of course, a natural way for me to look would be to do worldwide type of adventures. So I signed up to climb Kilimanjaro in 2014. And lo and behold, shortly after I made this list of my ideal woman, I met her on the side of Kilimanjaro in Africa, climbing the highest peak there. Sonia, a German woman who was at the time living in Shanghai, also an expat, and and done the expat lifestyle for a number of years at that time.
Mhm. Interesting. And you say German, well, what part of Germany was she from?
From Munster, the college town in northern Germany.
Okay. From an academic family, perhaps?
From an academic family, correct? Her mom was a teacher, and her dad was a financial controller for the local government there.
Uh, Fascinating. All right. So continue.
So we fell in love, and I started doing a commute from Alaska to Shanghai, 2 weeks in Shanghai, 2 weeks in Alaska. And of course, being a financial planner, I can work from anywhere. It's one of the great benefits of the job. And I even started to build some client base in Shanghai. And of course, this helped me with the US expat. I met a lot of expats in Shanghai that needed the kind of help that I was kind of an expert in. And the business grew and our relationship grew. And after a little more than a year, we decided to get a little more serious and start a family. Neither one of us was getting any younger. We decided we didn't want to start a family in China, although we both loved living there and the food and the people. We didn't think that was the right place to start a family. A lot of pollution and other things there. And so together we made a little checklist of where it would be a great place to start a family, and we settled on Hawaii. So in 2016, we moved to Hawaii for the purpose of getting pregnant and having a baby. And within the first week of arriving there, we were pregnant, and it worked out
God,
exactly
you
according
are
to plan.
goal oriented, aren't you?
Very much so.
All right. And so that would mean that your son, right? Four is now four.
Yep, correct. So we did. I worked from Hawaii, and of course, there's a huge international community in Hawaii. So I continued to grow my practice and specialize in expats and Americans both. And we had Hendrik in 2017, and then shortly after he was born, a recruiter called my wife and said, "Hey, we've got a great job opportunity in Moscow, Russia, for you," which sounded a little off the wall to us, but we were intrigued. You know, one of the questions I get a lot, and my wife does as well, is, "Man, you guys have been everywhere in this world. Where haven't you been?" And both of us always kind of our funny answer has been, "Well, we've never been to Russia." So when this opportunity came up to look at a job in Moscow, we decided it would be worth a look.
Interesting. And of course, you moved to Russia. So what year did you move to Russia? This sounds like 2000 and what?
18.
18. Okay. All right. So you're arriving in Russia in 2018, and you're talking to me, I think, from Florida today. Um,
Yeah.
Boy, I guess a lot happened in Russia in those 4 years.
Yeah, we've been in Florida for about a week now. We evacuated last Wednesday from Moscow due to the current situation, which I'm sure all your listeners are fully aware of. But Moscow was quite different in 2018. So they just hosted the World Cup. Uh, Moscow had put a lot of work into really preparing for the World Cup and becoming quite an international city. They'd added English to all of the signs and the metro stations and things like that, and really they cleaned up the city. And when we landed there, it was an amazing place. We instantly found love with it.
You know, you talk about the metro. Now, I've never been in the metro in Moscow, but I have in St. Petersburg. I think that those things are amazing. I mean, is it the same thing in Moscow? The art, I mean, you can almost learn the history.
Absolutely,
I mean,
absolutely. The metro is absolutely amazing in both cities.
yeah.
It's one of the coolest metros in the entire world.
I mean, it's almost worth going to those cities just to ride the metros, for a few days. It's such a fantastic thing. But I think you'd have to actually have, experienced that to understand it. But that's amazing stuff. All right. So I gather that you really like Moscow as a city. It's a fair statement.
Absolutely. It's a great city. Most people don't realize it's the largest city in Europe. Most people would think London, but Moscow is quite a bit larger than even London.
In terms of population, geography, or both?
So Officially, I think they say 12 million in Moscow. There's a lot of things that say if you count the suburbs and the rings, you're closer to 20 million people in Moscow. I'm not honestly don't know the exact figure, but it's definitely the largest city. A lot of history, a lot of culture. It's one of the cleanest cities I've ever lived in my whole life. It's one of the friendliest cities. It has a lot to do, a lot of culture, a lot of art. It's one of the most family friendly cities. They do a lot with green space and parks and family friendly activities all around. It's a nice place to live.
It's amazing. I mean, you would never get that impression from the Western media, would you?
No, not at all. And I spend a lot of my time telling people about what it's like. They're showing pictures. Many of my clients have come to visit me. I encouraged everybody that I knew to come visit, and many did. And every single person that came to visit was absolutely blown away. They had this image of gray and bleak, and some people
Yeah.
even said bread lines, right? They didn't realize it was going to be a big modern city with shopping malls and modern architecture and a lot of money, to be honest. There's more billionaires I've heard in Moscow than the rest of the world put together. I mean, cars driving down the streets are Maybachs and Lamborghinis. It's not a poor place, that's for sure.
And are there a lot of you know expats? I mean, from our perspective, American citizens, Canadians, Brits, what have you, there?
It's an adventurous expat community. It's not large compared to a place like Singapore or Shanghai. First, certainly there's not the kind of expat community as those places, but there is definitely a vibrant expat community there. The U.S. embassy there, before it got shuttered here recently, was the largest U.S. embassy, from my understanding, in the world. And there was definitely Americans around. There's an American international school. There's a British international school, but expats were few and far between. It's not like you ran into them every day on the street. If I wasn't looking for expats in everyday life, I would go a month at a time before I caught that American accent in a restaurant or walking on the street.
Uh-huh. So I infer from all this that you must have learned Russian well enough to survive.
That's a good question. A lot of people ask me that, and the answer is actually I didn't. I was there almost 4 years, and I probably only know 25 words of Russian. Uh, almost everybody in Moscow speaks English. And to be honest, I didn't put a lot of effort into learning Russian. We knew that Russia wasn't a forever place for us,
Yeah.
and we probably wouldn't use Russian after we left. I'm also been working on German, since my wife is German and my son speaks English and German, and trying to learn Russian and German at the same time. I found it a little bit challenging.
Yeah,
So I
probably given your marriage, the German's probably a more pressing investment.
Correct. So I learned the basic words to get around, but there was almost nowhere I ever went that there wasn't English speaking people. And with technology these days, of course, my iPhone speaks perfect Russian.
Uh-huh. So tell me how and why you say everybody, I don't know if that's the word you use, but clearly you're conveying the idea there's no problem getting around Moscow in English. Where do these people learn English?
So like most places around the world, the media and TV, all the movies, and most Russians, like I've learned all around the world, they want to travel like everybody else. The line outside the U.S. embassy to get a U.S. visa was always quite long. People would stop me on the street to practice their English, to ask me about New York, L.A., Las Vegas.
How do they know you're American?
I think it's pretty obvious from my accent in Russia when I would be
You mean
talking,
just by listening to you speak?
just by listening to me
I see.
speak. Yeah.
Okay.
And so they want to learn English. They know very clearly that it's kind of the international language for traveling, and if they're going to travel successfully, that they need a basic level of English. The young people for sure are all trying to learn English.
So I gather that the business of teaching English does pretty well there.
There are a lot of expats that are teaching English. Yes.
Yeah. Because I mean, I've known some who've gotten, these certifications, these CELTA or Trinity cert teach and stuff like that, have gone there to teach. Very, very interesting. COVID. How have you experienced the COVID thing in Russia in Moscow the last few years?
I'm an optimist by nature, so I tend to think the positive of everything. I think Russia was probably one of the best places to be during the COVID pandemic. Uh, I mean, just the fact that Russia is the largest country in the world. I mean, if you're going to be trapped, might as well be trapped in the largest place in the
That's how
world.
I feel about Canada, by the way. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Large
So
country.
the other thing is the Russians are they're very strong, stout people, and the kind of no BS type of people. And they certainly took it seriously. And they did have a lockdown for a short period of time, about 6 weeks. But then they decided, people should make their own decisions. And everybody understood what COVID was and what the risks were after a certain amount of time, and that life should go on. And their economy, honestly, they couldn't handle the extended lockdowns. A lot of the countries did, and the government wasn't in a position, I don't think, to support the economy for extended lockdowns like a lot of the world did.
Yeah.
So they let things open up, which actually, it sounds funny, but in Moscow, I felt more sense of freedom for quite a bit of the COVID pandemic than I think I would have anywhere else in the world.
I think you're probably right on that, particularly the province of Ontario, Canada, where I live, which, is, I think, fairly draconian. Um, all right. So, you're living in Russia. You're obviously living a good life, a meaningful life. You're obviously enjoying yourself. Um, but yet there's these dark clouds gathering, right? This whole, business, the politics there, I suppose, right? The business of Ukraine and that. What was your perception of what was going on? I mean, were you surprised? Did you expect, the events of the last couple of weeks, if we can use the cluster of words? I know this is a matter of perspective, okay, but Russia attacking Ukraine.
No, it's exactly what they did. And I was surprised. I didn't expect it. I didn't think it would happen. The political climate in Russia actually had felt very stable over the last 4 years. There were certainly, just like in America, people who like the current leader and people who don't like the current leader. But overall, the Russians were pretty vocal that whether they liked Putin or not, that the country was doing well. It was advancing. Wages were going up. People were becoming more free. There was not a lot of restrictions there, say, compared to living in Shanghai or in Hong Kong. I could watch CNBC, NBC. The internet wasn't really restricted. There were a few things that were restricted, mostly because of server laws, but it felt quite open and free. People were starting their own businesses and doing their own thing. I didn't see anything like this coming, to be honest. And when it all started and the rumors started and the troops started building up on the border, I went out of my way to tell people that I didn't see any danger, and I didn't think it was going to be anything more than some political muscle flexing, and that it wouldn't get into something out of control, and everything was normal and stable and life was great in Russia. The expat community was doing well. We were welcomed. I'd never had a bad experience in almost 4 years, not one, even close to bad experience. So I was quite surprised by all the events.
Now, I have read, and of course, you never know what to believe, right? In the media, but I have read that the government there has really gone into overdrive to, deny that it's actually a war, whatever. And what's the messaging coming from the government?
So that's hard for me to answer. I didn't follow state media. Of course, that's all in Russian. I don't speak or understand Russian. I followed more of the international news scene, which is what you would have followed and most of your listeners would have followed. So I'm not really sure what the Russian media was saying, besides what the Western media says the state media there is saying.
Yeah.
So I'm not super qualified to really answer that question. But I can tell you that the environment there felt normal and nobody seemed worried about it.
Uh-huh. Very, very interesting. So you're living in Moscow short term. I'm guessing you had an apartment there or something?
Yeah, so my wife worked for a large Russian retailer. She learned a lot more Russian than I did because she actually went to an office and dealt with Russian. She had a translator as well. yeah, we had an amazing life there. We lived right downtown off Tverskaya Street, about 300 meters from the Kremlin and Red Square. We could walk out our door and walk across Red Square within 5 minutes. It was really spectacular.
And so you basically picked up and left, within the last 10 days or something. Why is a stupid question, but why don't I ask, what was the event or events specifically that got you thinking we better exit this place?
So as the troop buildup on Ukraine started, and then ultimately the invasion, I really honestly wasn't worried right up until the actual invasion started. I wasn't worried to the degree that my wife and I, along with a big group of expats, had planned a skiing trip to Siberia the same weekend that the invasion started. And we felt comfortable enough right before the invasion started that everything was so normal that we would go on the ski trip to Siberia and leave our son, our 4-year-old son, in Moscow with our nanny, who had been with us the entire time in Moscow. She's like part of the family. So we actually were in Siberia skiing at a resort called Cheregesh when the invasion started. And once the invasion started, that's when it became very clear that this was going to escalate and it was time to make other plans.
And you made those other plans very, very quickly. So you basically just bought a plane ticket to Florida, and left?
We all did. So we flew back to Moscow on that Sunday. Most of us had already bought plane tickets to get out. It ended up taking multiple plane tickets for most expats to get out. As everybody's aware, the airspace closures happened quickly and rapidly to the west of Russia. It became harder and harder, and that escalated I wouldn't say it was fear, but the feeling of necessity to get out of there. It felt like everything was closing in around Russia quite quickly once the invasion started. And all the flights to America were canceled, the direct flights. We had flights directly from Moscow on Aeroflot, the Russian airline, to Miami, which we've taken many times, got canceled. The flights to Germany got canceled. The flights to UK got canceled. I mean, the flight cancellations were coming hard and fast, and expats were getting worried and buying multiple tickets. We ended up buying a ticket going east to Qatar, to Doha. Qatar Airlines was still flying. Emirates was still flying. Most of the expats we knew ended up going to Istanbul through Turkey. That was the easiest route to get back to Europe at the time. Those have gotten tougher. Most of those flights are being canceled now. And some of the expats I knew also were going to the stands, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and then heading over to Georgia. Now, it wasn't equal for all the expats, unfortunately. Those with the financial resources to buy multiple tickets, had a much easier time getting out. And tickets were escalating in prices. What normally was a $300 or euro flight, was going for 3,000 euros as the demand was skyrocketing. And not everybody, unfortunately, could just buy 2 or 3 tickets at that price for their whole family. The other problem was, cross-border families. There's a lot of Americans and other nationalities over there that have fallen in love and married cross-border, married a Russian woman. And it's no surprise that Russians are restricted on where they can go in the world. It's not as easy for a Russian to get on an airplane and just fly anywhere with the visa situation as it is for, say, a German, a Canadian, or an American. So this forced the hand of a lot of Americans and Germans and European Union citizens to go to places to escape Russia, like Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Georgia, places where Russians could go without a visa, which is a good move. It's probably better than being in Russia currently, but Kazakhstan or Georgia isn't the place that a lot of the Americans really want to be either. So it really forced the hand for a lot of expats over there quite quickly.
Well, it certainly strengthens the argument for multiple citizenships as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Like my son has a German and American passport. And it really gives me appreciation for being an American and the passport. I am privileged. I'll admit it. I can go more freely to more places than a lot of people in the world can. And that hurts me, to be honest. Our nanny is from the Philippines. She's part of our family. She's helping us raise our son. We love her. And we wanted to take her. We felt an obligation to help her evacuate Russia. And so we were a little bit in the same boat as where we could go and couldn't go. Um, Luckily, she had been working at the US Embassy for a decade before we met her, and she had a US visa in her passport already. She'd worked for a diplomatic family that had planned to take her to the United States several years earlier, and then ended up getting an assignment somewhere else and couldn't take her. But she did have a US visa already from working for that family. So that worked out in our favor, and we were able to evacuate her along with our family
Oh my
through
God, that's
Qatar to the
fantastic.
United States.
That is
And
fantastic.
she has been, she's here with us now in Florida while we try to get our life set up here. As you can imagine, setting up a brand new home in Florida with a 4-year-old is much easier with a little bit of help.
Well, that is an amazing story. And, I thank you so much for sharing that. But also, it really provides a background for, I mean, I can really understand, how all of these experiences collectively, would make the financial planning and advising, not only a passion for you, but just, an extension of your normal life.
Absolutely. And I want to add that when we left Moscow, we never felt unsafe. Moscow is a long way from Ukraine. So, people were worried for our lives and things like that. When we left Moscow, everything in Moscow was still running totally normal. People were going out to restaurants, movies. You couldn't tell without watching the news anything was going on. The pressure to leave was definitely because of the airspace closure and the worry that things would escalate as they've had over the last week.
Do you
And that
feel
life
good about
would
your
become
decision I'm not asking if you feel good about not being in Russia. I'm asking, do you feel good about your decision to leave Russia?
absolutely. Life is gonna, and this brings me to a really important point I want to share with your listeners. Life in Russia is going to get very tough. Like anybody, I like normal things, right? So as all these companies pull out of Russia, now there's no McDonald's, there's no Coke, there's no Pepsi, there's no flights because of all the embargoes and sanctions that are going on. Life is going to get very tough there. There's already tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of layoffs going on. IKEA, I mean, all these major international businesses left, all the Apple stores shut down, all the Nike, all the Adidas stores shut down. And they're just laying off the
Boy,
Russians. The Russian people don't deserve this, right? So people might say Russia should take it for this war, but I would encourage people to realize that this war is really just a couple people that are instigating it. When we were skiing in Cheragash, for example, and the war broke out, most of the skiers were wearing banners that said, "We do not want war." And all the Russian people that I talked to were not in favor of the war. And they're just regular everyday people like you and me trying to go to the grocery store, raise their families. They're not involved in this. They don't want to be involved with this. They're all losing their jobs. They're losing everything in life that they love. And we're punishing 150 million people that have nothing to do with this. And it really, really saddens me. And I don't know if there's a better way to handle it than to sanction the country, but I'd encourage people to not just go, "Wow, Russia should take it," because it's just normal everyday people and families like you and me that are really taking it on the chin there, and in my opinion don't deserve it. They have nothing to do with this
Oh, for
conflict.
sure. I mean, it's blaming people just because of their citizenship or nationality or
Right.
something, of that nature. It is. I mean, the sanctions thing is terrible. It's unbelievable. And I was looking at something a while ago about, in 1960, the US sanctioned Cuba, right? And this continues on, and, all the poverty there. The same thing with Iran. I mean, leaving aside the reasons for that, I think you make a very important point that these sanctions do the most damage, to everyday normal people.
Yeah, so we still have our apartment there. We literally bought plane tickets and got out in 2 days.
That's it. All your
We,
stuff's there.
Not all of our stuff. We did take 11 suitcases. We saw the writing on the wall and expected that this would escalate and that there would be a high probability of not returning to Russia. So we took the most important things with us. We still do have a lot of things there. Unfortunately, a lot of the expats we know just took one suitcase, fully expecting this to blow over in a few weeks, which it still could, I suppose, but it's unlikely. Now, I think that any of the expats will return. It's also hard on Russian companies, as it was already hard to attract expats to Russia just because of what people thought of it. Generally, when my wife wanted to hire an expat, if we could get them to come to a look and see and experience Moscow, they would always come on board. But without coming and seeing Moscow, it was very difficult to get an expat to come. And now Russia is going to have a very hard time drawing any expat talent to their country for probably years to come.
Well, and that, of course, a very, very bad thing. Very bad thing, because it, I mean, it doesn't do anything to, prevent wars and conflict. And, wars, conflict are just so costly to everybody. So, I mean, are there ever any winners, really? I mean, it's just a question of the degree of losses, right?
Correct.
Well, Jimmy, this has been a great conversation, and I thank you very much for it. And I'd really like to do a part two with you where we talk about your book, Divorce
Absolutely. Love to do
Diagrams.
that.
Are you up for that?
Absolutely.
All right, thanks very much. I'm talking here today with Jimmy Miller. He's an expat financial planner. And Jimmy, do you want to just sort of read or say your website and contact information in for the record on this one?
Sure. If you want to get a hold of me, my website is Baobab Wealth, or Baobab Wealth Abroad if you are living overseas or a cross-border family, just like the tree, like I explained in the beginning of the podcast. My US-based phone number is area code 907-317-8454. And you can email me at j.miller@baobabwealth.com.
Well, that's fantastic. Thanks very much for speaking with me today.
Absolutely. My pleasure.